AnswerRocket was started about 9 years ago, and Gartner would put us in sort of this augmented analytics space, is what they would call it. And we started with this whole really simple idea, which is, wouldn't it be great if you could sort of ask your data a question? And it really started with this idea that business users struggle to get information, and they could ask a question like, what were sales by month, and so on. And so we've been doing that for years. And it worked great. We could produce insights off that data as to what the outliers were and so on. What we also learned was that style of question requires a certain amount of data literacy. It requires understanding what metrics go with what dimensions and so on. And what we learned interacting with various users, that was great for folks that did have the data literacy, probably more analytics folks or analysis folks, but it wasn't as good for business people. And when you talk to a business person and you say, well, what question do you want to ask? They say, I just want to know, how did my business do? And why did sales go up, or why did they go down? It's a very much simpler question. And so over the last, since ChatGPT sort of hit the scene back in November of last year, we saw this as a fantastic opportunity to actually enable business users to ask those questions and get really meaningful, accurate answers. So we've created Max. So Max is this AI assistant that acts like a colleague that understands your business and can enable business people to finally ask those questions that they want to ask, which is, how's my business doing? What's driving market share? Or what's happening with this brand in this market? And that's what we're here showing at Big Data London today. Traditional augmented analytics tools, and AnswerRocket included, enabled, as I mentioned earlier, this able to somewhat still structured question. And you have to know, I want sales, and I have it by month, and I have it been, in Germany, and so on. And in fact, even some of the new ChatGPT Copilot solutions we're seeing now are sort of oriented around that kind of a solution. But what we've learned is the questions that people really want to ask and answer are much more sophisticated. They're much more around what's driving something, or what's a forecast for something. And the key component for us in terms of creating copilots that are really different from anything in the augmented analytics world is these, what we call skills. So skills are analytic routines, machine learning capabilities that are a data science. If you ask a data scientist what's driving sales for something, a data scientist would use this routine to fundamentally answer the question. So what's different from traditional augmented analytics, I think with traditional augmented analytics, you get to ask these very simple questions like, what was the hottest selling product last month? Fine. Most users don't want to ask that question, and they're not going to ask that question. They want to know what's driving things or what the forecast is and so on. And it requires this capability of not only understanding the question, combining that with machine learning models under the covers that are really doing the right analysis, and then turning that back around to the large language model to describe the facts around what are the drivers, so a business person can then act on that. What we're seeing are folks are trying to approach this in a fairly generic way. In other words, they're coming up with a copilot that's can sit on top of all your data. And if you do that, you can again ask fairly generic questions that require still some data literacy. And really our approach, and that we've seen as we've started to work with our customers on this, is that you really need to focus on a use case, and because that use case, let's say I'm trying to understand, what my brand is doing and how healthy my brand is. Well, that use case requires some specialized knowledge, some access to certain data, understanding what that data means, an understanding of how people think about and even talk about that data, and the building of skills that ideally understand how to access, interpret, and talk about that data. So this whole world of the copilots, we're seeing a lot of very generic ones that provide data access. What we're finding is you really need to center around an analytical problem. Understanding how healthy is my brand? How is my brand performing? Or what are our sales drivers? Those things require a lot more domain expertise and use case expertise, and in many cases, company expertise, because what we find is the language that company A uses to talk about the same kinds of things around brand power, for example, as company B, can make the difference in adoption in terms of how people understand, interpret, and value the results that they get back from a copilot like Max.